The mahogany casket gleamed under the funeral home's soft lights as my brother Marcus cleared his throat at the podium, his black suit impeccable despite the tears he'd manufactured for the occasion. "I'm honoring Dad by taking over the family business," he announced, his voice carrying just the right tremor of emotion. It's what he would have wanted, to keep Morrison and Sons in the family. Mourners nodded approvingly, tissues dabbing at eyes, while I remained seated in the front row, my hands folded calmly in my lap. Which business? I dissolved Morrison and Sons yesterday and started fresh. The paperwork's filed with the state. How long had Marcus been practicing that speech in the mirror, perfecting the catch in his voice, never once considering that the empire he planned to inherit had already turned to ash? The funeral home fell silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. 300 people packed into rows of folding chairs, and you could have heard a tear drop. Marcus gripped the podium edges, his knuckles white against the dark wood, that practiced expression of noble grief sliding off his face like wet paint. "What did you say?" His voice cracked, genuinely this time. I stood slowly, smoothing my black dress, the one Dad had liked because it was sensible. Everything about me had been sensible for 35 years. Sensible Elena who ran the office. Sensible Elena who handled the books. Sensible Elena who kept Morrison and Sons afloat while Marcus played golf with clients and Dad slowly drank himself into this casket. "I said I dissolved the company yesterday," I repeated, my voice carrying clearly through the hushed room. Morrison and Sons officially ceased to exist at 4:47 p.m. when I filed the articles of dissolution. I've started a new company, Morrison Technical Solutions. The Sons part seemed outdated. Aunt Patricia gasped from the third row. Uncle James dropped his hymnal. Mom, sitting beside me in her perfect widow's veil, turned to stone. Marcus laughed, a sharp, ugly sound that bounced off the funeral home's cream walls. "You can't dissolve a company you don't own." "Actually, I can." I pulled a folded document from my purse. "Dad signed over 70% of the shares to me 3 years ago. You'd know that if you'd ever attended a board meeting." "That's impossible. I'm the heir. I'm the son." The word hung between us like an accusation. The son. The one who mattered. The one whose name was literally in the company title, even though he hadn't set foot in the office more than a dozen times in the past year. "Yes, you're the son," I agreed. "The son who spent company funds on sports cars. The son who lost us the Henderson contract because you were too hungover to show up. The son Dad enabled right up until his liver gave out. How dare you?" Mom's voice cut through the tension. "At your father's funeral." I turned to face her, this woman who'd spent 30 years pretending not to see what was happening. "Would you prefer I wait until after the burial? Until Marcus has had time to forge Dad's signature on documents? Until he's emptied the accounts I've spent 15 years filling?" The funeral director hovered near the doorway, clearly debating whether to intervene. Poor Mr. Weatherby. He'd been preparing for a standard service, not corporate warfare over a casket. "You're lying," Marcus said, but his voice wavered. "Dad would never." "February 15th, 3 years ago," I interrupted. "The day after you crashed the company car driving drunk. The day Dad finally realized that leaving everything to you meant leaving nothing at all. He came to my apartment at midnight, stone-cold sober for the first time in months, and asked me to save what Grandpa built." I unfolded the document, holding it up. "Transfer of shares. Notarized. Witnessed. Ironclad." Marcus stumbled down from the podium, reaching for the paper. I let him take it, watched his face cycle through denial, rage, and finally, a dawning comprehension. "But I'm supposed to." He trailed off, looking lost. "Dad always said." "Dad said a lot of things," I replied. "He said you'd grow out of your party phase. He said you'd settle down after college. He said you'd take an interest in the business eventually. He said anything to avoid admitting his golden boy was a disappointment." "Elena." Mom stood, her perfectly composed facade cracking. "This is neither the time nor place." "When would be the time, Mom?" I asked. "When Marcus has driven another company into bankruptcy. When he's burned through whatever inheritance you think Dad left. When he's standing over your casket, giving another performance about family legacy." The crowd stirred restlessly. Some people were already edging toward the exits, uncomfortable with the family drama playing out over Dad's body. Others leaned forward, fascinated by the real-life soap opera. Father Murphy stepped forward from beside the casket. "Perhaps we should continue with the service." "No," I said firmly. "Let's finish this. Marcus wants to honor Dad? Let's honor him with the truth for once." I walked to the podium Marcus had vacated, looking out over the assembled mourners. Dad's business associates, golf buddies, drinking companions. The employees who'd watched me hold everything together while Marcus played heir apparent. The relatives who'd spent years asking when I was going to get married and let my brother take his rightful place. My father built Morrison & Sons from nothing, I began. He was brilliant, innovative, hardworking. He was also an alcoholic who couldn't admit his son was cut from different cloth. For 15 years, I've run that company. I've signed the contracts, managed the employees, developed the products. Marcus's contribution consisted mainly of expensive lunches charged to the company card. You ungrateful. Marcus started forward, but Uncle James caught his arm. 3 months ago, I continued. Dad's doctor told him he had maybe 6 months left. His liver was gone. That night, he called me to his office. Not his son, me. He asked me to promise that Morrison & Sons wouldn't die with him. I told him I couldn't make that promise. Mom sank back into her chair, pressing a handkerchief to her mouth. I couldn't promise because Morrison & Sons was already dying. Killed by nepotism, strangled by the weight of a name that meant Marcus would always expect to inherit what he'd never earned. So I made a different promise. I told Dad I'd save what could be saved, build something new from the ashes. I looked directly at Marcus. Yesterday, I kept that promise. Every employee has been offered a position with Morrison Technical Solutions. Every client has been contacted about the transition. Every patent, every contract, every asset that wasn't tied to the Morrison & Sons name has been transferred. We open for business Monday. You stole my company. Marcus shouted, Uncle James no longer able to hold him back. I saved our employees' jobs, I corrected. I preserved our clients' trust. I protected Grandpa's legacy from your incompetence. If that's theft, I'm guilty. The room erupted. Relatives choosing sides, voices raised in accusation and defense. Mom wailing about family disgrace. Marcus threatening lawsuits, criminal charges, divine retribution. Through it all, Dad lay silent in his casket, finally at peace with decisions he'd been too weak to make while alive. Mr. Weatherby approached the podium, his professional composure admirably intact. Miss Morrison, perhaps we should postpone the service. No, I said. Dad deserves his funeral. Marcus can have his tantrum afterward. I returned to my seat, ignoring the chaos around me. The priest, bless him, managed to restore enough order to continue the service. Marcus stood rigid beside Mom, his eulogy notes crumpled in his fist. When his turn came to speak, he managed only a few choked sentences about loss and legacy before retreating. I didn't speak again. I'd said what needed saying. The burial was quieter, the crowd thinned by scandal. Marcus stood across from me at the graveside, his eyes burning with hatred that would probably last a lifetime. Mom clung to his arm, having chosen her side as she always had. As dirt hit the casket, I thought about Dad's midnight visit 3 years ago. How his hands had shaken as he signed the papers. How he'd cried, the only time I'd ever seen him cry. I failed him, he'd said. I gave him everything except character. You can't give someone character, Dad, I'd replied. They have to build it themselves. Like you did, he'd said. In spite of us. After the service, as mourners headed for their cars and the post-funeral reception I wouldn't be attending, Marcus cornered me by my car. This isn't over, he hissed. I'll sue. I'll contest the will. I'll destroy your new company. With what money? I asked. Your trust fund ran out 2 years ago. Mom's been covering your rent. And any lawyer who looks at the documentation will tell you the transfer was legal. I'm his son, he repeated like a broken record. The company is my birthright. Birthrights are medieval, I said, unlocking my car. In the modern world, you earn what you get. Or you don't get it. I drove away, leaving him standing in the cemetery parking lot, a prince without a kingdom. In my rearview mirror, I saw Mom hurry to his side, probably promising to fix everything like she always had. My phone buzzed with messages. Employees confirming they'd received their offer letters. Clients expressing confidence in the transition. My lawyer assuring me all the paperwork was bulletproof. Morrison Technical Solutions would open Monday with a clean slate. No drunk patriarch, no entitled heir, no family drama masquerading as business meetings. Just good people doing good work, building something real. Dad was gone. Morrison & Sons was gone. But from their ashes, something better would rise. Marcus could keep the name. I'd kept everything that mattered. The next morning, the local business journal ran a small article about the dissolution of Morrison & Sons, and the launch of Morrison Technical Solutions. They'd managed to keep the funeral drama out of it, focusing instead on the restructuring and new direction. Professional. Sensible. Everything the company had needed to be for years. Marcus would survive. Mom would enable him to fail upward into some other opportunity. The family would whisper about me at gatherings I'd no longer attend. But Monday morning, 83 employees would walk into a new building, sit at new desks, and start building a company where merit mattered more than birthright. Where the name on the door meant innovation, not inheritance. I'd dissolved Morrison and Sons to save it. Sometimes you have to destroy something completely to rebuild it right. Dad would have hated the scandal. He'd have been mortified by the public scene, the family embarrassment, the whispers at the country club. But late at night, after enough whiskey, he might have admitted I'd done what he couldn't. I'd chosen the company over the son. And in doing so, I'd honored him better than any eulogy could have.